Thank you for watching and sticking with me through this thrilling journey. Now it's time to dive back into Adanna's story, and trust me, you don't want to miss what's coming. If you haven't watched part 1 yet, make sure you do. I've linked it in the comments below, so catch up and join us for the next chapter of this captivating tale. Now, without further ado, let's jump right back into the action. Adanna took a steadying breath, fingers hovering over the screen before she sent her response. Handle it, but keep me updated. Her pulse quickened as the weight of the message settled in. She wasn't ready to rush back to the polished halls of power just yet. No, not until she uncovered what she was truly searching for. The streets of Lagos stretched out before her like a maze, and tonight she had no map. The notification from her assistant lingered like a shadow, reminding her that one wrong move could pull her back into the corporate world she was trying to escape. But as her hands gripped the steering wheel, her Uber app idling, her heart raced with a different tension, the thrill of living a double life. By day, she was the formidable Adanna Ikiji, billionaire CEO. By night, she was Ada, a simple driver chasing something money couldn't buy. Would tonight be the night she found it? Or was this secret life about to unravel in ways she couldn't control? Keep watching, because the next twist in this journey is about to take you deeper than you ever imagined. She pulled over on a deserted street, the amber glow of street lamps casting elongated shadows across the dashboard, creating an eerie dance of light and dark. For the first time that night, she allowed herself to pause, to think, really think. The steering wheel felt like an anchor as she gripped it tightly, the hum of the engine a distant echo in the background. The skies, the late-night rides, the conversations with strangers, it all seemed like pieces of a game she was playing, a mask she was forced to wear to escape the world of wealth and expectations. But how much longer could she juggle this double life? How long before the facade she built began to crack, before her two worlds collided in ways she couldn't control? Her phone buzzed sharply, snapping her out of her thoughts. This time, the notification wasn't from her assistant Neka or the Uber app. She glanced at the screen and saw her older brother's name flash across it, Ifeanyi. Her chest tightened. He was one of the few people who knew about her undercover life, her quest to find love without the influence of her wealth. She hesitated, then answered. "Adanna, where are you?" Ifeanyi's voice, deep and filled with concern, echoed through the speaker. There was a tension in his tone, one she couldn't ignore. "You've been out all night. Is everything all right?" Adanna exhaled, leaning her head back against the seat. "I'm fine, Ifeanyi. Just thinking." A pause hung in the air between them. "You know," he began, his voice softer now, "you don't have to go to these lengths. There are plenty of good men who would love you for who you are, not for your money." A bitter smile tugged at Adanna's lips. Would they, though? Every man I've met only sees the billionaire, not me. They love the idea of me, the lifestyle, the power, but not the person behind it. Ifeanyi chuckled softly, but there was a seriousness behind his words. "That's because you've built walls so high. No one even knows who you really are. Maybe it's not about pretending to be someone else. Maybe you just need to show the world the real Adanna, without the boardroom, without the title." His words hit her like a sudden punch, cutting through the layers of her disguise. He wasn't wrong. She had been hiding for so long, behind wealth, behind power, that she had forgotten what it meant to be vulnerable. But could she really do that now? Could she risk being Adanna, billionaire CEO, and still find someone who would love her for the woman beneath it all? "It's too late to turn back now," she said, quietly, almost as if trying to convince herself. "I need to see this through." Ifeanyi sighed on the other end of the line. Just be careful. You're playing with fire. Not everyone is going to react the way you expect. The call ended, but his warning lingered. The truth was, Adanna didn't know how people would react, especially if they found out who she really was. Would they see her as a fraud? Would they exploit her vulnerability? Or worse, would they walk away, leaving her as alone as she feared? Her phone buzzed again, this time pulling her fully back into the present. It was a ride request, this one from a part of town she rarely ventured into, a quiet, forgotten corner of the city where shadows seemed to stretch just a little longer. Something about it felt different, almost foreboding. But tonight, Adanna wasn't in the mood to be picky. She accepted the request and began driving. As she neared the pickup location, the streets grew darker and more deserted, the usual city bustle fading into silence. When she pulled up, a man stood alone by the curb, his back turned to her, his posture rigid. He wore a simple hoodie and jeans, the hood pulled low over his face, masking his features. Adanna's instincts flared, urging her to be cautious. But she swallowed her hesitation and unlocked the doors. Without a word, the man slipped into the back seat, his movements slow, deliberate. His face remained hidden beneath the hood, and though the night was cool, his demeanor was tense, heavy with something unspoken. "Where to?" Adanna asked, her voice steadier than she felt. "Mainland Bridge," he muttered, his voice rough, almost weary. She glanced at him in the rearview mirror, but his face was still obscured, a shadow among shadows. An uneasy feeling crept over her, but she reminded herself that not everyone who looked suspicious was a threat. Maybe he was just another soul carrying the weight of his own struggles. As the car moved forward, cutting through the quiet streets, the man broke the silence again. "You ever wonder what it's like to be someone else? To live a different life?" His question came out softly, yet there was an edge to it that made Adanna's heart skip a beat. She forced a smile, though her pulse quickened. "More than you know." He chuckled darkly, the sound low and unsettling. "Yeah, me too." They drove on in silence, the tension in the car thickening with every passing second. Adanna's mind raced. Who was this man? And why did his words feel so pointed, so personal? It was as if he knew the life she was living, the lies she was telling, the masks she wore. When they reached the bridge, the man spoke again, his voice unnervingly calm. "Stop here." Adanna pulled over, her hands trembling ever so slightly on the wheel. The man reached for the door, but before he stepped out, he paused, finally turning to look directly at her. His hood fell back slightly, revealing a face etched with weariness, his eyes dark and piercing. For a moment, they locked gazes, and it felt as though he could see straight through her, past the Uber driver disguise, past Ada. "You're not who you say you are you?" he asked, his voice cutting through the stillness like a knife. Adanna froze, her breath catching in her throat. How could he know? She had been so careful, so discreet. But before she could respond, the man gave her a small, knowing smile and disappeared into the night, leaving her alone with her thoughts and a growing sense of dread. As the darkness of the night pressed in around her, so did the mystery of her journey. Who was this man? How had he seen through her disguise? And more importantly, what would happen if someone else uncovered the truth she had fought so hard to keep hidden? The game was becoming dangerous, and Adanna knew it was only a matter of time before her secret life caught up with her. Adanna sat in her car long after the mysterious man had left, her hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly that her knuckles turned white. Her mind raced, replaying his cryptic words. "You're not who you say you are you?" How could he have known? Was it just a coincidence? Or had her carefully constructed facade already begun to crack? The familiar hum of her phone snapped her back to reality. Another ride request. She sighed, rubbing her temples. Maybe it was time to call it a night, but the drive to keep pushing forward was too strong. She had started this journey to find something real, something honest, and she couldn't let a moment of fear derail her plans. She accepted the ride. This time, the passenger was a woman, Ngozi, in Ikoyi, one of the more affluent areas of Lagos. Adanna drove toward the location, hoping the next encounter would be a simple one. Yet, her thoughts kept drifting back to the man on the bridge. His piercing eyes haunted her, as if they could see straight into her soul, unmasking her every secret. When she arrived in front of a lavish apartment complex, Ngozi was already waiting, her designer handbag slung over her shoulder and a look of irritation on her face. She was dressed in a chic blazer and high heels, looking every bit the corporate powerhouse. Adanna recognized the type, driven, focused, probably in her early 30s, and undoubtedly used to getting her way. Ngozi slid into the back seat without a greeting, her fingers tapping away at her phone. "Lekki Phase 1, please," she said, her tone clipped as if she were in a constant rush. Adanna nodded and began driving, grateful for the silence. But the tension from her last ride still hung in the air, like a storm waiting to break. "You must get a lot of rides from here," Ngozi commented, breaking the silence. "It's a busy area." Adanna shrugged. "I suppose." For a while, they drove in silence. But as they crossed the bridge, Ngozi's attention shifted from her phone to the window. "I don't know how you do it," she said suddenly, her voice softer now. "Driving people around all day, listening to their problems, dealing with their moods. I could never." Adanna smiled faintly. "It's not so bad. You get used to it." Ngozi sighed, looking out at the skyline. "I envy you," she murmured, almost to herself. "You get to escape from all of this." She gestured vaguely at the city beyond. From the pressure, the expectations. No one cares who you are or how much you make when you're just driving them from place to place. Adanna's heart skipped a beat. There it was again, the theme of living two lives, of hiding behind the mask of normalcy. She wanted to tell Ngozi how right she was, how suffocating it felt to live under the weight of other people's perceptions, but she couldn't, not yet. "I guess," Adanna said carefully, "it's easier to be invisible sometimes." Ngozi's gaze shifted back to her. "Exactly. People don't realize how hard it is to always be seen, to always be judged." She hesitated before adding, "Sometimes I wish I could just disappear." Adanna glanced at her in the rearview mirror, surprised by the vulnerability in her voice. "Why don't you?" Ngozi chuckled, but there was no humor in it. "Because disappearing isn't an option for people like us, not when everyone is watching, waiting for you to slip." Adanna felt the familiar weight of her own reality pressing down on her. She knew exactly what Ngozi meant. They were both trapped in their own ways, Ngozi by the corporate ladder she had climbed, and Adanna by the empire she had inherited and built. As they neared Ngozi's destination, the conversation faded into silence. But something had shifted between them, a shared understanding that neither could fully express. When they reached the sleek apartment complex in Lekki, Ngozi hesitated before stepping out. "Thanks for the ride," she said quietly. "And good luck." Adanna raised an eyebrow. "Good luck?" Ngozi smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. "I don't know what you're running from, but it's written all over your face. Just be careful. Not everyone is as blind as they seem." With that, she disappeared into the building, leaving Adanna sitting in stunned silence. First the man on the bridge, now Ngozi. Both of them had seen something in her, something she hadn't even realized was visible. Was she slipping? Was the mask of Ada, the Uber driver, not as convincing as she'd hoped? The city hummed with life around her, but Adanna's mind was stuck replaying Ngozi's parting words. Good luck. Be careful. Not everyone is as blind as they seem. The warning hung heavy in the air. She was caught in a dangerous web of deception, each ride, each conversation pulling her deeper into the risk she had created. Control was slipping through her fingers, but Adanna's resolve was unwavering. She had come this far, and she wasn't about to stop now. Her heart ached for truth, for someone who could love her without the glimmer of wealth in their eyes. But with every passing night, the stakes climbed higher, and the cracks in her perfect disguise began to show. Could she hold her secret long enough to find what she was looking for? Or was her carefully constructed world on the brink of shattering? The tension is building. Keep watching, because this journey is only getting more intense. Will Adanna's quest for love survive the secrets she's hiding? The city was quieter now, the usual hustle of Lagos fading into the background as midnight came and went. But inside Adanna's car, the storm of thoughts raged louder than ever. Ngozi's cryptic warning and the unsettling words of the man on the bridge swirled in her mind like a whirlwind she couldn't escape. Her grand plan, this undercover experiment to find love without the weight of her wealth, suddenly felt like quicksand. Every step forward only pulled her deeper into uncertainty. Was she as invisible as she thought? Or were people starting to see through the cracks in her carefully crafted disguise? She debated calling it a night, giving herself a break from the exhausting game of pretending. But just as she reached for her phone, a new Uber request flashed on her screen. The name caught her eye, Emeka, and something about the location piqued her curiosity. It wasn't a nightlife hotspot or a crowded event space. Instead, it was a quieter, more residential district on the outskirts of the city center. Odd for this time of night. Before she could overthink it, she accepted the ride and began weaving through the quiet streets. As she neared the destination, her unease grew. Standing in front of an upscale restaurant was a man who looked distinctly out of place in the sleepy part of town. He was tall and broad-shouldered, his presence immediately commanding attention. Dressed in a sharply tailored suit and oozing an aura of wealth and power, he opened the door and slid into the back seat. The scent of his expensive cologne filled the car, a stark contrast to the simpler passengers she had driven earlier. For a fleeting moment, Adanna wondered if she knew him from her world, the one of business deals and high-profile events. But his name, Emeka, didn't ring any immediate bells. "Good evening," he greeted, his tone smooth and full of confidence. "Lekki, please." Adanna nodded, keeping her posture relaxed, though her heartbeat quickened. "Sure thing." As she pulled away from the curb, Emeka settled back into the seat with an ease that didn't match the hour. After a beat of silence, he glanced at her through the rear-view mirror, his gaze piercing. "I'm surprised to see an Uber driver out this late, especially one like you." Adanna's stomach tightened at the remark, though she kept her voice steady. "What do you mean?" He chuckled softly, as if he knew something she didn't. "Most drivers this time of night are tired, grumbling about the day. But you're different, composed, calm, like you don't belong behind that wheel." Her grip on the steering wheel tightened, but she forced a casual smile. "Maybe I've just had a good night." Emeka's eyes lingered on her in the mirror, studying her with an intensity that made her pulse race. "I have a knack for spotting people who are out of place. And you, driver, don't strike me as someone who's used to blending in." Adanna's heart skipped a beat. What was it about tonight? Why did it seem like everyone could see through her? She couldn't let her guard slip now. "I'm just here to drive, sir. Nothing more." He smiled, but didn't push further. The silence in the car grew heavier as they cruised through the empty streets. Just as she thought the conversation had died, Emeka leaned forward, his tone shifting. "You ever think about doing something bigger than this?" Adanna's brow furrowed, curiosity tugging at her. "What do you mean?" "You don't seem like someone who's content with driving people around for a living. There's more to you, I can tell. And I happen to be someone who recognizes potential when I see it. Have you ever thought about making a career shift? I'm always on the lookout for talent." Her mind whirled. Who was this man? Why was he offering her something more when he didn't even know her? Part of her wanted to dismiss him as just another arrogant businessman, assuming every stranger was ambitious like him. But there was another part of her, deep down, that was intrigued by the offer. What did he see in her? "I'm not sure what you're getting at," she said cautiously, though she couldn't help but be curious. Emeka leaned forward slightly, his gaze unwavering. "I'm involved in several ventures, real estate, investments, even tech startups, and I could use someone with drive, someone who isn't meant to spend their life behind the wheel. You're someone who thrives on challenge, aren't you?" Her breath caught in her throat. It felt as though Emeka had peeled back the very layers she was trying to hide. The ambition, the power, the wealth, all things she had pushed aside in search of something more genuine. And yet, here he was, tempting her with a life she had purposefully stepped away from. "I appreciate the offer," she said, keeping her voice steady. "But I'm just a driver." Emeka chuckled, sliding a sleek black business card onto the passenger seat. "Are you? Well, if you ever change your mind, consider this." Adanna glanced down at the card, her stomach flipping. Emeka Okoye, CEO of Okoye Group. The name was embossed in gold letters, the title belonging to one of the most prominent real estate developers in Africa. Her mind raced. If he knew who she really was, Adanna Ikeji, billionaire CEO, the entire dynamic would shift. But for now, she was just Ada, the Uber driver, navigating this strange intersection of lives. As they neared Lekki, Emeka's phone buzzed with a series of messages. His expression shifted as he read them, growing more serious. "Looks like I'll have a busy night ahead," he said, slipping the phone back into his pocket. "But remember, my offer stands." When they arrived at his destination, he gave her one last lingering look before stepping out, disappearing into the night. Adanna sat in the car for a long moment, staring at the business card on the seat. She had entered this experiment searching for love, something real, untainted by wealth. But the further she went, the more complicated everything became. Emeka's offer was a temptation, a reminder of the power and influence she could wield with just a word. But could she keep both worlds separate? Or was she already too deep to turn back? As the night grew darker, the questions in her mind multiplied, each one pulling her further into the unknown. Adanna sat motionless, staring at the sleek black business card on the passenger seat. Emeka Okoye, CEO, a name that held weight in the world she knew all too well. A world of power, wealth, and endless expectations. The kind of world she had stepped away from to seek something deeper. Yet here it was, creeping back into her life, even in her guise as a humble Uber driver. Her mind buzzed with questions. What had Emeka seen in her? Had he somehow recognized her true identity, or was he simply another ambitious businessman looking for talent in unexpected places? The card felt heavy in her hands as she picked it up, tracing the embossed letters with her thumb. A part of her was tempted to reach out to him, to see where his offer could lead. But another part of her, the part that had embarked on this journey to escape that life, told her to toss the card away and keep moving. She sighed deeply, slipping the card into the glove compartment, hidden but not forgotten. It was a symbolic act, a reminder that she was still straddling two worlds, unsure of which path to fully commit to. For now, she was Ada, the Uber driver, searching for love in the most unconventional way possible. But how long could she maintain the illusion? The city's nightscape stretched out before her, a labyrinth of lights and shadows, much like her life at this moment. Her phone buzzed again, snapping her out of her thoughts. It was a message from her assistant, Neka. "Madam, the deal has been secured. However, our competitors are growing restless. I recommend reviewing the final contract when you're available." The pressure of her responsibilities weighed on her like an anchor. She had a company to run, deals to oversee, and an empire to protect. And yet, here she was, driving strangers around the city in search of something as elusive as love. She typed back a quick reply, thanking Neka for handling the situation, but the conflict within her was growing. How much longer could she keep up this charade? Her phone pinged again, another ride request. This time it was Femi, and the pickup location was in a part of Lagos she rarely ventured into. Adanna hesitated, her instincts warning her to be cautious. But curiosity, and perhaps a desire to escape her swirling thoughts, pushed her to accept the ride. As she approached the rundown neighborhood, she couldn't help but feel a sense of unease. The streets were darker here, the buildings more weathered, with an air of neglect. She pulled up to the curb, her headlights illuminating a young man in his 20s. He was dressed in a simple t-shirt and jeans, but his posture was tense, and his face bore the look of someone carrying a heavy burden. Femi slid into the back seat without a word, barely acknowledging her as he stared out of the window. Adanna noticed the deep frown lines etched into his face, as though life had thrown him more hardships than he could handle. "Where to?" she asked, keeping her tone neutral. "Surulere," he muttered, his voice barely audible. She nodded and started the drive, glancing at him occasionally through the rearview mirror. Femi didn't seem interested in conversation, his gaze fixed on the passing streets, lost in thought. But the silence between them wasn't the comfortable kind. It was thick with something unspoken, a tension that clung to the air like humidity. After a few minutes of driving, Femi finally spoke, his voice low and strained. "Do you ever feel like you're drowning? Like no matter what you do, you can't get your head above water?" The question caught Adanna off guard. She had been expecting another silent ride. But now, Femi's words hit her like a punch to the chest. His voice carried the weight of someone who was barely holding on, someone on the edge. "I think everyone feels like that sometimes," she replied carefully. "Life has a way of throwing more at us than we think we can handle." Femi let out a bitter laugh, shaking his head. "Yeah, but some of us don't get a lifeline. We're just left to sink." Adanna's heart clenched at his words. She didn't know his story, but she recognized the pain in his voice. It was the same kind of pain she had seen in the eyes of so many people, people who were struggling while she lived in her world of privilege and wealth. How could she possibly relate to someone like Femi when their realities were worlds apart? But still, something in her wanted to connect, to understand. "What's going on?" she asked gently, glancing at him in the mirror. "Maybe talking about it will help." Femi was quiet for a long time, his fingers nervously tapping against his knee. Finally, he sighed and spoke, his voice raw with emotion. "My mom's sick. She needs surgery, but I can't afford it. I've been working 2 jobs just to keep us afloat, but it's never enough. No matter how hard I try, it's like I'm stuck in quicksand, sinking faster every day." Adanna felt a pang of guilt wash over her. Here was someone fighting for survival, for the life of a loved one, while she was playing at being poor, searching for love in disguise. The contrast between their lives couldn't have been starker. "I'm sorry," she said softly, her heart aching for him. That's a lot to carry on your own. Femi didn't respond immediately, his eyes still trained on the window. Yeah, but that's life, right? Some people get everything handed to them, while the rest of us are left to fight for scraps. His words stung, but Adanna knew he didn't mean them personally. He was simply speaking his truth, a truth she had been sheltered from for most of her life. She wanted to help him, to offer some sort of comfort, but what could she say? Telling him who she really was would only complicate things, and offering money would feel like charity. No, Femi needed more than just a handout. He needed hope. As they neared his destination, Femi shifted in his seat, his tone softening slightly. Thanks for listening. Most people don't bother. Adanna smiled faintly. Sometimes just being heard can make a difference. When they arrived, Femi hesitated before stepping out. He glanced at her one last time, and for a moment there was something in his eyes, a flicker of connection, of understanding. Take care, he muttered before disappearing into the night. Adanna watched Femi walk away, his silhouette swallowed by the night. A heavy ache settled in her chest, the weight of their conversation pressing down on her like a tidal wave. In that fleeting moment, the gap between her two worlds, the billionaire and the Uber driver, felt impossibly wide. How much longer could she continue wearing this mask, pretending to be someone she wasn't? The deeper she went into this double life, the more tangled her heart became. Could she keep pretending, knowing there were people like Femi who needed more than just a ride? They needed real help. The city, once alive with the buzz of late-night energy, now felt strangely still, as if the streets themselves reflected the storm brewing inside her. As she drove aimlessly through the quiet roads, her thoughts spiraled. What was she really doing? Was this experiment about love, or simply a way to escape the suffocating demands of her billionaire identity? The weight of her disguise pressed harder with every mile, making her question everything. She pulled the car to the side of a lonely street, switching off the engine. The silence inside the car felt heavier than ever, the hum of the world outside almost non-existent. For a moment, she sat in stillness, gripping the steering wheel as if it were the only thing grounding her. What if this whole journey had been a mistake? What if love wasn't hiding behind a disguise, but waiting in the world she had been running from all along? Her brother's words echoed in her mind. Maybe you don't need to pretend to be someone else to find love. Maybe you just need to show the world who you really are. But could she really do that? Could she strip away the carefully constructed walls she had built for so long and let someone see the real Adanna Ikeji? What would happen if she did? Would anyone love her? Not for her wealth or status, but for the woman beneath it all. Then there was Femi. His story stayed with her, wrapping around her heart like a vine, growing tighter with every thought. What if she could help him? What if, instead of hiding, she used her power to make a real difference in his life? The idea tugged at her, filling her with both fear and hope. But where would that leave her search for love? Her phone sat on the passenger seat, glowing softly with notifications, reminders of the life she had momentarily abandoned. Her assistant Neka had already messaged twice, asking if she would attend an urgent board meeting in the morning. But the thought of returning to that world, with all its meetings, contracts, and expectations, felt like chains tightening around her soul. Could she ever truly go back? Dear viewers, what do you think will happen next? Does Adanna decide to stop hiding and help Femi, revealing her true self? Or will she choose to return to her old life and take her brother's advice, finally searching for love as the woman she really is? The night is far from over, and the choices before Adanna are anything but simple. Stay tuned for part 3 as her journey continues, and the lines between love, power, and identity blur even further. Thank you for watching and joining me on this emotional ride. If you enjoyed the story, please like the video and let us know your thoughts in the comments. We'd love to hear what you think Adanna should do next. Don't forget to subscribe for more captivating stories just like this one, and hit the notification bell so you don't miss the next chapter. Until next time, stay blessed and keep believing in the power of love.